Welcome to another episode of Phil's Reviews. Today I'm going to take a look at the Auratone 5C Super Sound Cube. In the list of studio monitors that have a lot of folklore and mystery to them, the 5C is definitely up there. I think along with NS-10s, these have been in studios for so many years, dating back from the 60s and the 70s. And so today's video, we're going to talk about, is this worth buying for your home studio? Auratone was founded in 1958 by Jack Wilson in Chula Vista, California. And starting in the 60s and 70s, you started to see these in major studios all around the world. These were a really polarizing speaker, and some people called it the horror tone because of how bad it sounded. There was a period where they discontinued making these speakers, but somewhat recently they started to make these speakers again, and now they have them available in active and passive versions, and the company is now based in Nashville, Tennessee. Fast forward to today, and you still see them in studios almost 50 years later, and it kind of begs the question, why are these still important in studios, and is this worth buying? This review is for the passive version of the Auratones, which require you to get a separate power amp so that you can connect it to your Auratone speaker. You can see here that the back connection, you have to connect it to your own power amplifier, so you will need a power amp with the passive versions. They do make an active version now, and that has an amplifier, so you won't need a separate power amp, but this review is just for the passive version. This speaker is a 4.5-inch speaker, and the frequency response is 75 Hz to 15 kHz. It's made in the US, and the build quality is very solid. To connect your power amp to your passive Auratone, on the back connection, if you use a banana plug connector, those work pretty well for connecting it, and I've had no issues with that. Let's talk about some notable users. One of my favorite mixers is Bruce Swedian. He is the mix engineer for Michael Jackson's Thriller. And in a Sound on Sound article published in 2009, in an interview, he talked about his process for that album. And he basically was mixing on 2 Auratones for 80% of his mix. And then the other 20%, he was listening on his full range Westlake speakers. And when I first read that, I was really intrigued about how one of the best sounding albums that I've ever heard was mixed on this speaker that's $200 per speaker. Derek Mixed by Ali is the engineer who did Kendrick Lamar's album To Pimp a Butterfly. To me, that's one of the best sounding albums that I've ever heard. And in another Sound on Sound article, he also mentioned how he mixed 80% of the album on an Auratone in mono. So he wasn't using 2, he was just using 1, and he was bouncing back and forth between, this one small speaker and his main speakers. Another notable user is Philippe Zadar. He did Phoenix's album Wolfgang Amadeus Phoenix, and in the song Listomania, he used the Auratone just to really get the balance of those guitars in that track. In a mix with the Masters video, you can see him bouncing back and forth, A-Bing his Auratone with his main speakers, and he just kept A-Bing them over and over again just to make sure that it was really translating on both systems, and I will put a link to that video in my description. Chris Cody, who is an engineer for Beach House, Yeah Yeah Yeahs, and Future Islands, had a quote where he said that, if all of his gear vanished, he wouldn't really be too bummed out, and if he was to start over again, he would get an Auratone. And I thought that was a hot take because of how many engineers are using analog hardware over and over, and here he's saying that if he's starting over, he would start with something as humble as the Auratone 5C. Let's talk about the pros of the Auratone 5C. The first thing that comes to mind is the mid-range. This speaker is meant to produce accurate mid-range so that when your mix is being played on all kinds of different systems, it's going to really cut through. So whether you're listening to it on studio monitors or an iPhone or on your laptop, the mid-range is all going to come through very well. They're also very honest. These speakers they truly are not hyped in any way. They give you a pretty brutal reflection of how your mix is sounding. And so the last thing that you want in a pair of speakers is for it to be untruthful and being more flattering than it really is, so that when you actually play it back on consumer level devices, it just doesn't sound as good. But these are extremely honest, and they will translate and they will tell you exactly what is happening in your mix. These speakers have real world translation. These speakers help you to improve your mix so that whether people are listening to it on their phones or on their laptops or their studio monitors, it sounds good and it translates. Another pro is the value to cost ratio. These speakers, you can get one for $199, and that's a very high value at a low cost. I have ATCs and they're very high value at a very high cost, but these are some of the best kind of bang for your buck things to add to your studio because of how much it really translates and helps your mix. Which brings me to my next point, is that the Auratone is a great way to integrate a mono or just a single driver speaker into your workflow, so that whether you have a two-way, a three-way speaker, or you're working with a sub, you can always bounce back and integrate the Auratone into your workflow just to see that it's, being compatible in most consumer playback systems. And so I would say the con is that you do have to get a designated power amp to connect to your Auratone. I've used a Bryston 4B, which is kind of overkill, but it sounded my Auratone sounded amazing on that because of how good that power amp. And currently right now I'm using a Crown D75, and it gets the job done, but I kind of wish I kept the Bryston because of just how good it was for giving it enough clean power for the Auratone. Some good alternatives for the Auratone 5C, you could get the active version of the Auratones. They run for about $750 per pair, and they do have a speaker attached, a power amp in it, and so you won't need a separate power amplifier. Another good option is the Auratone Mix Cube, which is $500 for a pair. So if you're not interested in looking for a power amp and you don't want to deal with that hassle, those are some really good alternatives as well. Speaking from a value perspective, I think anyone would benefit from having an Auratone 50 years later from all these studios using it in the 60s and 70s, just because it fills in a gap that a lot of mixers have trouble with, and that's real world translation for how can my mix, whether it's on my headphones or my speakers or my laptop, how can my mix sound good anywhere? And I think the Auratone is just such a low cost but high benefit speaker that helps you to really dial in your mix so that everything sounds good on all playback systems. I highly recommend the Auratone speaker to anyone who's trying to get their mixes to sound better across all playback systems. With the ratio of the cost to the value and the benefit that you're getting, I think it's completely worth it if you spend any time mixing. And so I suggest anyone to buy this if you can. It's helped me tremendously in my own mixing and has always been just a really valuable tool. If you've had any other kind of experiences or have a question, feel free to drop something in the comment section. Please like and subscribe if you like this content for some more gear reviews, and thanks for watching.